Based in Vancouver, Washington, the Cooney Foundation transitioned from a family trust to a charitable foundation in 2017. We have assets of about $250 million, and as a new organization, we continue to build our infrastructure and programs. For now, we take a place-based approach to funding with a focus on Washington and Oregon. We occasionally fund outside of the Pacific Northwest when a compelling opportunity to collaborate or support a scalable model arises. We have two strategic focus areas informed by our founders, Wayne and Joan Cooney: cancer research and programs that accelerate inclusion and vibrant lives for people with developmental disabilities. We devote significant resources to the expansion of housing for this particular community. Two of the Cooney's 4 children experienced intellectual disabilities, and doctors repeatedly urged Wayne and Joan to institutionalize the boys. They refused, and Joan battled the intolerant policies of housing, education, and healthcare to ensure that her sons would have inclusive, dynamic lives. Our work is a direct reflection of their determination and entrepreneurial spirit. We're a curious, inquisitive group, and we embrace discovery. As a new foundation, we scanned the horizon and searched for opportunities to learn from and collaborate with funders that shared our focus areas. We were fully focused on building our grant programs and were searching for best practices. We were happy to find many examples in the area of cancer research, and while we came across funders who supported programs for people with intellectual disabilities, like education, the arts, and employment, we only found a handful across the country with an emphasis on person-focused housing, and we didn't find any peers in our region. As one foundation CEO put it, we had a lonely issue. In fact, we felt a little like a unicorn. As we reached out to housing providers and advocates to discuss needs and funding, they didn't quite believe we existed. Now, you might wonder what we mean by person-focused housing. It's housing that not only meets a person's needs, but also their preferences. It's basically what anyone wants when searching for a home: a place you like and enjoy, a place with access to transportation or near employment, education, healthcare, and recreation, a place near or with friends. It could be an inclusive community populated by people with and without intellectual disabilities, a community of peers who experience autism, a supported living community, or even independent home ownership. In spite of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act 31 years ago, we consistently heard from housing providers and advocates that the need for person-focused housing had become a regional crisis. We quickly realized that grants alone would not be enough to address the tremendous need or result in the system change that was required to advance solutions, so we completely recalibrated our strategy. Our board, who had been engaged in this learning journey, agreed that a multifaceted approach was necessary, one that centered the knowledge of our partners and self-advocates in the process, and deployed grant-making, mission investing, and advocacy to advance housing for people with intellectual disabilities. We're excited to share our approach, what we're learning, and the impact of these efforts. Hi, my name is Angela Holt, and I'm the president of the Cooney Foundation. As a new foundation, we integrated advocacy into our overall strategy from the start, viewing it as a critical component to delivering on our mission and our promise to the community. 4 principles guide our advocacy work. We listen, learn, apply, and adapt. Listening and learning were the first 2 critical steps in the process. I have to give a big shout out to the Exponent Philanthropy staff, in particular Andy Carroll, who helped me navigate the beginning of this journey and made some impactful connections with other members. Mary Anthony of the 1772 Foundation and Michael Weinberg with the Thornburg Foundation were both very generous with their time and advice. It's worth noting that we have different focus areas and geographies. So, while it's helpful to have program or mission alignment, it's really not mandatory. The bones or framework of successful advocacy are similar and transferable. I integrated many of Michael and Mary's excellent approaches into our work. Over 6 months, I spoke with foundations, nonprofit advocacy leaders, and policymakers, among others. I asked for introductions to other people and organizations and continued to build a constellation of experts. Several key themes emerged: the need to be clear about goals, objectives, and how to define success within your organization and amongst your partners. Centering the voices and lived experience of the people and organizations from the community you are serving is critical, so working side by side is incredibly important. Advocacy is the long game, and you often take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It's never a linear process and seldom ends neatly. It takes many forms, both large and small, making it accessible for funders of all sizes. We applied what we learned to the development of a collaborative approach to our advocacy framework. We engaged Community Vision, a Portland nonprofit with a deep and respected history within the disability community, to partner with us. The organization provided navigation, education, and connections as we learned more about the gaps and opportunities in housing for people with intellectual disabilities. Over the next few months, we engaged more than 40 individuals and organizations in our region through one-hour interviews and follow-up surveys to help us identify existing advocacy efforts, areas of need, new opportunities, and how we could best support grassroots efforts. We kept in contact with this group throughout the process. We also collaborated more intensely with a group of 10 individuals, including people with lived experience, on a monthly basis. This group played a more active role in shaping and guiding the work. Over time, as we gained more information from the community, our understanding evolved and we adapted our approach. The feedback ultimately pointed to a critical need for data quantifying the number of people with intellectual disabilities who needed housing. Advocates shared that when requesting more funding for housing or programs, policymakers always asked them to prove the need, and recent data didn't exist. It was a powerful tool that could help propel advocacy efforts. We contracted with Echo Northwest, a highly reputable firm, to conduct the research. We were shocked to learn that the national data used to quantify the number of people with intellectual disabilities is 25 years old. All policy, planning, and funding decisions are based on data almost as old as the ADA itself, resulting in a profound lack of funding for housing and other programs. The study also revealed the lack of affordable housing options for people with intellectual disabilities and identified a parallel housing crisis. In Washington, 70% of people with an intellectual disability live at home with a family caregiver. In Oregon, that number is 61%, and many of these caregivers, typically parents, are over the age of 65. Most lack a transition plan in the event of illness or death, placing their adult child at risk of homelessness. Our partners provided valuable feedback regarding how the data was presented in the study and also helped to shape other resources. Their engagement ensured that materials and messaging resonated and that our use of language was appropriate and respectful. One-pagers and toolkits designed for a range of audiences were created and distributed widely and were used extensively by the organizations and individuals who collaborated on the process. We all worked in collaboration with Echo Northwest on the policy recommendations and myth-busting. We started by debunking some of the myths associated with people who experience intellectual disabilities and educating affordable housing organizations, policymakers, and others about the need and the opportunities. Some of the policy recommendations included aligning with national efforts to improve data collection and to enhance state-level data collection and capacity to link and analyze data across agencies. We also recommended that state agencies conduct additional outreach to identify individuals with intellectual disabilities. Another recommendation is to elevate the needs of adults experiencing IDD when allocating scarce housing resources. Currently, this community is completely left out of these conversations. Centering our work on the perspectives and voices of the community we're serving is vital to informing our approach. By listening, applying what we learn, and adapting to new information and opportunities, we can flex to meet the evolving needs of our nonprofit partners while fulfilling our mission.
So Community Vision was founded about 32 years ago, and the purpose was to help people move from institutions into their own homes and apartments. And so where we started was people who had really been traumatized by their institutional experience, and then helping them to have their own home and their own place where they got to call the shots. And so that has really still driven who we are, and we have evolved to have some additional services.
So Jen, tell me a little bit about how the needs have changed in terms of housing needs for people with IDD, and what do you see as the most critical emerging issues right now?
Yeah, so probably not surprisingly, housing prices have been the biggest change. Here in the Portland metro area, they have quadrupled and quintupled in these past years. And so while in the past we could really focus on home ownership for folks with disabilities, now that's out of reach for most people. And so we've really had to shift to affordable rentals and finding new partnerships with housing developers to be able to meet the needs that are currently there.
And yet it's still a struggle to find housing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that emerging housing crisis that we're seeing for this community?
So I would say there's kind of two main reasons why there's a housing crisis right now. One is that most folks with disabilities are living on Social Security income. That's about $800 a month. And so there's not very many housing options that allow people to actually live independently on that income. The second is that we have a lot of parents who are baby boomer age, who are getting older, and their son or daughter with a developmental disability is still living with them. And so there's this impending increase in demand for folks with disabilities to have housing, and there's just not the housing stock available.
When we first, met Community Vision and got to know you and your work, we really felt that, your knowledge and expertise and the connections that you had in the community would really help to inform our practices and our funding and really how we approach this community and support this community. Right out of the gate, you identified data as really a critical need. So do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I think there are multiple things that we learned as we started working with you all, or that we shared. One is just the complexity of the system and how difficult it is to understand, but it's also just how much we don't know. So even the state agency who's in charge of this can't really tell us a lot about the demographics of the people they support.
Well, and I remember, and we can talk a little bit about your advocacy work, but you shared with us that when you would meet with, affordable housing providers or elected officials or policymakers, that often the first question they would ask is, well, where's the data? How many people are we talking about? And so there was really a burden on you to kind of prove that there was a need, to prove that a need existed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where it was so great to have the partnership, because that is funding the data study isn't something that we have access to, but you all recognizing from the foundation perspective that, here's a role that we can play, is that we can hire a team to be able to actually figure out what's out there. And I think the data study has really opened doors for, again, as you mentioned, policymakers, housing developers, people kind of outside of the disability community, because we all knew it anecdotally, but we didn't have the numbers to back it up. And again, particularly with policymakers, they need to know the facts. And so this allowed us to have a different kind of conversation than we could before.
We were looking around and trying to think, well, where do we start? Where's the greatest need? And who's going to inform us and help us on this journey? Again, just given your range of expertise and really your knowledge about this community, and not only about needs, but also preferences. What are the preferences of this community when it comes to housing?
Well, and I got to say, from our perspective, it was definitely the first time that a foundation ever asked us those questions. So typically, the relationship that we as a nonprofit have with foundations is just about funding, right? It's just about, here's our grant portfolio, here's what we do you fit in or not? And I think what was so valuable for us was to be able to feel like it was truly a partnership. And I think that helps inform our experience, because we can learn from your perspective as a funder, and then you can learn from our perspective what might be the barriers or the things that you wouldn't know just as if you weren't actively involved.
So to your point, funding is one thing. We can make grants, but that's not going to bring about the system change that we need.
One of the things I've been reflecting on is the reality that each different type of organization plays a role. And I think one of the unique things that foundations can do is have the role of convener. So we have disability providers, we have advocates, we also have housing folks and housing developers. And so kind of the whole system is actually talking to each other. And I think your honesty about who you are as a foundation, and that, maybe that's one of the things that we can do, is bring people together, because you didn't try to pretend that you're the subject matter experts, but you knew that you could have a role in bringing all of those experts together to actually move things forward.
Thank you. And that was a definite goal. And I think Again, another learning for us is that power of convenings. And I think, as we mapped out, barriers, some of those barriers were silos. Everyone was in their silo and weren't really communicating with each other, not because they didn't want to or didn't care or didn't want to learn, but again, just those silos kind of organically grew over time. And I think bringing, these groups together and the learnings that came out of each one of those, and also the enthusiasm, like people were excited to learn from each other, whether it was different housing models or we're just really interested in learning more about the needs and then also the opportunities.
And I think this is where we're really aligned, is to transform the whole system and to build capacity. And we know it's not just about community vision, right? There's only so many people we're going to be able to support. But if we are able to take a systems lens and share our learnings and have partners like you all as funders to be able to move things forward, eventually maybe we can even get the government systems to continue to move forward.
So when we were talking about convening and connectivity and bringing others, to the table, one of the things we really appreciate about the partnership with you is all of the other entities that you put us in contact with. And so that was so important to the process. We had, more than 40 other organizations and entities weigh in on that process. And we engaged in, conversations with each one of these organizations to really understand, their perspective around gaps and needs and where we could be most helpful and most supportive.
Well, thank you. And I'd say the other thing that I think was really important is that you also centered the voices of people with disabilities in that process. Turns out they have ideas about what they want and what matters to them. And you all in that process, recognizing that that was important and finding different groups of people to share their own lived experience was so meaningful to them, and also helped us all remember what the point was. And so I really appreciate that. I think another thing is also, though, being aware of what the foundation does have to bring. So there are some unique opportunities that you have. When you approach a decision maker as a funder, they listen differently than when they are approached by us. And it's not better or worse, but it's different. And so I think over time, we were able to see actually the sum is greater than its parts. And by having you all maybe sometimes be the first in and sometimes be the last in, it really has opened up different kind of conversations and different opportunities. Again, particularly when it comes to decision makers, they just hear something different when they say, oh, a foundation's actually involved in this, and it's not just you all who we hear from all the time. I think it has caught their attention in a new way.
And I think sometimes we forget advocacy takes many forms, and our role is not to lead the charge. We're not telling everybody else what to do. That's not our role. Our role is to identify trusted partners, strategic partners, those with deep expertise in an issue and with deep relationships and community, and support that work and advance that work. Because again, it all comes back to, how are we helping this community?
This can be really lonely work, and it's hard. I mean, we're trying to change history, right? We're trying to do something big. And I think it was important to me that the times that both the person who provides technical assistance and yourself to actually realize that you get it and you care, and it's another kind of person in the fight, as opposed to just feeling like it's you flapping me flapping my wings and being out there alone. I think sometimes we don't talk about that in our world because we're like, it's about the mission and it's about the purpose, and yet turns out we're humans who are doing this work. And so to feel like it's not just us against the wind, but that there's actually a team, and that the strength that we all have when we know that we're not alone has been really meaningful.
Well, and that means a lot, and that's a big part of our purpose. And it really means a lot to us, and it's again why we do what we do. And I think it's one of the best parts of the work. The data study provided a concrete way for the sector to define and illustrate the challenge. The next important step was to evaluate what we learned and activate that knowledge. The study and its impact were the catalyst for a broader conversation with the board about advocacy. It opened the door to additional learnings and awareness regarding gaps and opportunities. It expanded our relationships, and it drove additional advocacy work and capacity building with a wide range of organizations. The data study identified the need for greater bridge building and coordination between the affordable housing sector and developmental disability service providers. We were fortunate to hire a consultant, Martha Van Fleet, with vast affordable housing expertise and connections at every level of the state of Oregon. Martha activates our relationships with the affordable housing sector in Oregon and Washington, works in concert with disability service providers to inform our advocacy strategy, and helps to foster greater awareness and communication between these two worlds. In response to stakeholder feedback, we added technical assistance to support capacity building. This tool is often underutilized but can have a big impact on the ability of a nonprofit to advance their mission and work. This is another example of where we have applied learnings from the community to adapt our approach. Broadly defined, technical assistance is support that helps nonprofits acquire any specialized service or skill that is not currently resident within the organization. Martha, our consultant, provides technical assistance to the nonprofits in our constellation that are engaged in advocacy or need assistance with navigating public and affordable housing agencies. There's no application process or grant. We begin with a conversation about the scope of work to determine alignment and the estimated number of hours. We start with a 10-hour baseline for services, and if it goes beyond 10 hours, we have a second conversation to determine next steps. We fund her time, and the projects generally take 1 to 5 hours with a typical focus on the following: navigation regarding the affordable housing sector, developing educational talking points, letters, and testimony, or meeting facilitation, including agenda development. These efforts have helped our partners secure funding, strengthen advocacy initiatives, and increase their knowledge and understanding of the affordable housing sector. The more the data study circulated amongst nonprofits, policymakers, public officials, and affordable housing organizations, the more our constellation of partners and impact grew. I was asked to present the results of the study to Washington State's Developmental Disabilities Coalition, a statewide group comprised of nonprofits, city and county employees and advocates. One of the attendees, who led developmental disability services for King County, asked me to meet with all of the county DD coordinators for Washington State. For context, Washington has 39 counties. After brainstorming our approach with several of the folks from King County, the person hosting the convening also invited leads from county behavioral health departments and affordable housing departments. The presentation led to a robust discussion about the need to better coordinate services and approaches across these traditionally siloed areas. It was a watershed moment in terms of building awareness, knowledge, and understanding about the housing needs of people with intellectual disabilities. People were really open to stepping outside of their particular zone to learn and collaborate when given the opportunity. Our lesson? Never underestimate the power of a single convening. The ripple effects can have far-reaching impact. In response to those discussions, we surveyed our partners regarding their needs, goals, and objectives. There were 2 distinct categories that emerged: the desire to share information about housing projects and new ideas, and the desire to collaborate on advocacy initiatives and opportunities. We have convened 2 virtual meetings so far this year with Oregon and Washington stakeholders that include housing providers, affordable housing agencies, service providers, and advocacy organizations. Both convenings yielded learnings for all attendees and provided us with an opportunity to identify additional gaps and adjust our work in response. For example, one of the sessions yielded the need for a specific planning grant application for new housing projects. We fund planning grants, but as part of a more general catalytic grant program. And, based on feedback from our stakeholders, we'll pair the funding with technical assistance and peer mentorship. We learned that while the funding for the planning of a new housing project is critically important, the technical assistance and mentorship from a peer housing provider can accelerate and strengthen the process. The development and launch of the data study also enabled us to become acquainted with more nonprofits that were engaged in housing advocacy. We pivoted a portion of our grantmaking to support capacity building within these organizations. These grants range from $20,000 for grassroots support to $150,000 for a more robust multi-year campaign. Here are a few examples. One of the oldest and largest self-advocacy groups in the country, People First of Washington, received $25,000 in general operating support to help sustain and expand their housing work. A grant of $25,000 to the Arc of Spokane is funding the development of a grassroots advocacy effort amongst self-advocates in eastern Washington. These efforts will support and advance rural housing, and the group will work in collaboration with People First of Washington. Community Vision in Oregon received $100,000 to advance their housing access project, which has three main components: partnering with community development corporations to increase the number of accessible, affordable housing units through more set-asides, providing navigation and support to help people with disabilities find housing and services, and advocating for system change at the state and local level. A $150,000 grant is funding a collaborative effort between Arc of Washington, Disability Rights Washington, and Allies in Advocacy to develop a long-term advocacy strategy and public affairs campaign. The approach centers the voices and experience of people with intellectual disabilities throughout all aspects of the work. These three organizations also have the capacity, connections, and track record to effectively advance solutions. The team is also leveraging a bipartisan legislative and executive effort to move the state of Washington to more community-based services. We've learned the importance of supporting smaller, hyper-localized community efforts and larger, multifaceted statewide efforts. Most of all, partnering with and centering the work within the organizations that have the subject matter expertise, the relationships, and the credibility is the best way to advance impact. In 2020, we provided $2.5 million in grants to advance a range of housing solutions in Oregon and Washington for people with developmental disabilities. We also recognized the opportunity to go beyond grants and utilize our full portfolio in service to advancing innovative or untested ways of addressing this need. Mission investing is another key tool that we deploy to advance our impact and that of our partners. Mission investments help to further philanthropic goals and include any type of investment that is intended and designed to generate both a measurable social or environmental benefit and a financial return. Investments include both market rate and below market rate financial returns and include mission-related investments. These are designed to have a positive impact while contributing to the foundation's long-term financial stability and growth. Program-related investments are investments that are primarily made to achieve programmatic rather than financial objectives. We set a target of 5% of our portfolio for now, and that's in addition to our grant making, and we utilize both MRIs and PRIs. To attract other investors or funding for a project, mission investors generally accept higher levels of risk without the exception of comparable returns. This is necessary to advance new approaches that market rate investors, like banks, won't contemplate. This is what many of our partners experience when trying to launch new housing communities or develop proof of concept. It's incredibly difficult to get new projects off the ground when you can't guarantee a market rate of return or have the collateral to secure a bank loan. Mission investing can reduce barriers to accessing more conventional investments by taking on additional risk, bridging funding gaps, and attracting other funders to the mix. We found this especially true for the kind of housing that we seek to advance. An example of how we activated a PRI to advance housing is through our work with the We Build community. It's a housing complex that provides adults with autism affordable, person-focused housing and independence, in addition to an ownership stake in the community. Based on what we know, this model is the first of the kind in its nation. That means there weren't other successful examples for lenders, foundations, and other funders to examine. The nonprofit was able to finance the first phase of the project in part through funding from residents who purchased a stake in the community. It was a slow process with each unit built as funding came in. It was a stop-start approach that wasn't ideal for residents. The foundation provided We Built with an $800,000 no-interest loan. You're probably wondering why we opted for a no-interest loan and didn't just award a grant. Well, here's why. A loan actually gave the project more credibility in the eyes of other funders. And we felt strongly that the founder, Ann Wilkinson, had created a replicable model, and our hope was that once the loan was repaid, it could then be repurposed into seed funding for another similar project. We were also impressed that Ann was willing to open source her approach and the project plans for anyone interested in implementing a We Built community. This would go a long way to jumpstarting similar efforts and the creation of more housing. Let's hear from Anne about the community she created and how a program-related investment helped to advance her efforts.
This community started because I have a son who was not able to do traditional housing. So group home or foster home or living by himself or living with roommates just wasn't going to work. So we looked around and we thought, well, I guess we should just build something. Let's buy this property and we'll do 5 little houses and we'll have house parents in a main house and they'll fix dinner. And then he can live by himself, but he can just walk across the sidewalk if he needs support. It'd be way cheaper for the government to pay just for that little bit of care he needs rather than somebody 24 hours a day keeping him safe. When he is safe and he is able to live by himself, he's just not safe in the community living by himself because he's at risk to be taken advantage of. So this all started as a 5-house thing. We ended up with property that had quickly turned to high-density residential, so they told us, oh, now it's going to be 23 units. There's no variances for this lot, this lot you have. And so we looked around, there wasn't a different lot, and we launched. So we launched what we thought was going to be 5 houses into 23, and we had about enough money for 5 houses. We didn't have the money for 23. We talked to banks, we talked to private lenders, we did fundraising events, we started a nonprofit, we did everything we could to get the money, but the money was just really hard to get because we weren't developers, we weren't builders, we were parents and teachers, all heart, no business, as the bank liked to call us, and just couldn't get anybody to back us that this was an idea that might catch on and might work. We call it the story of no because almost everywhere we went, we were told no. When we finally met the Cooney Foundation and they were able to give us a loan to finish it, it just changed just everything about it. At 0% interest, we didn't have to make a payment. We were able to just finish our whole project. We had 2 sides of our project done and we had 1 whole side left, 8 more units, plus this big party barn still to go. And it would have taken us at least another 2 years to get the funding for that. The problem with funding is everyone wants the land to be used for its greatest and highest purpose. So we didn't do that here. We didn't build 3 big apartment buildings and we don't have 30 people in each one of them. We built this community specifically for a reason, and so the challenge around that was, but you could make more money. You could make more money if you had more people, you could make more money, but we didn't do this to make money. Even the appraiser, he says, well, you could have made more money, why are you only charging $450 a month to live here? And it's like, well, they've already paid to build it, and that's what it costs to live here. That's what it costs to maintain and to upgrade and keep things going. And so having the money from the Cooney Foundation, then it was like, as soon as you have somebody who gives you even a loan, it opens the door to everybody else because now you have legitimacy around your project. I think the most unique thing is that the people who live here are the owners. They were able to design the inside of their house just as if they built a new house with a regular builder. They picked their kitchen, their flooring, their walls, their trim, their layouts, all just the same as if they had built a traditional house. You know, the people who were buying in didn't want a big giant group home. They want to live in a community where they know their neighbors and their neighbors know them and are respectful of each other, and that's it. They don't want to have a van that says we built on it and go all together to the store or to an event. That's not what this is. This is your own independent housing. So our wait list is over 300, I think now, for this next project, which is 12 more units that we're going to expand next door. We're really, really proud of the quality and the process. Our process is 1/3 of the cost of low-income housing in this area, and we have a lot more to show for it. It really is so much better than we ever thought it could be. I don't think anybody who worked on this project would say, I expected it to be like this. It's just exceeded everybody's expectations. I think foundations are going to be the source of funding that banks can't be. because our country is just based on profit, 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 and making more money and more money. And foundations still have a heart, and that's going to be the difference.
As you heard from Anne, one of the barriers to funding was the fact that she prioritized the creation of a community rather than maximizing the density of her property. Her approach didn't make it less affordable, but it made it less desirable for lenders and other funders. This is where a foundation's mission plays a critical role. While we advocate for more housing, we're equally committed to housing and communities that prioritize needs and preferences, not just numbers of units. PRIs also help to advance innovation. The loan helped get the project across the finish line into proof of concept. While an organization or housing effort might not want to replicate the exact model, there are plenty of elements that can be adapted or adopted, including WeBuild's approach to energy efficiency, which reduces costs and the project's environmental footprint. It was an unexpected yet impactful learning for us. This dual benefit led to our development of a program to cover the cost of energy assessments for new and existing housing. PRIs can also help the recipient build credibility and a track record. Housing development is complex. Demonstrating the ability to complete the project and repay the loan according to the terms is a powerful catalyst for attracting future support and investment. PRIs and foundation engagement can also help safeguard an organization's mission and ensure that nonprofits aren't pressured to stray from their core objectives. I mentioned earlier that Anne was pressured to increase the density of the project, and she declined. After completion, she was contacted by an investment firm that offered to replicate the WeBuilt model in multiple states. While this was a fantastic endorsement, the organization wanted a guaranteed rate of return of more than 20%. Obviously, this would impact the affordability and intention of the model. This is exactly why investments from foundations can be vital to helping nonprofits maintain the integrity and mission of a project or initiative. Thus far, PRIs, which count toward a foundation's annual 5% payout requirement, are an underutilized financing tool. The mission-focused nature of foundations enables us all to play a key role in providing the kind of flexible funding that jumpstarts initiatives, advances innovation, and meets deep unmet needs that are ignored by traditional capital markets. For us, PRIs and mission investing are an important part of our ability to activate our mission and our impact. This work requires agility and the willingness to take on risk. It's vital that board and staff are in alignment and have clarity about the organization's values and goals. This facilitates more rapid decision-making, enabling the organization to implement the work more quickly while ensuring that internal and external efforts are consistently values-driven. Our board chair, Greg Goodwin, sets the tone for this approach with our board.
We want to change the conversation, and if you want to do that, you've got to be willing to take risks. If we see high potential and we think the individuals and groups involved have a realistic strategy to get to their goal, then we're interested in knowing about them and we want to support them. The data study really led to new relationships with a lot of organizations that are addressing the needs in the community that we practice in. Actually, I think it helped to create a whole new network that didn't exist. And given the magnitude of the need that was identified, we thought that this was a good outcome, and it was really important to do. Well, I would encourage people to put their money to work in the areas where they practice, and do it aggressively. The resources are scarce, and the people funding these things are often risk-averse themselves. They want certainty, they want a result, and they want to be able to point to a result without really sometimes pointing to the other side of it, which is the unmet need. We need to evolve to impactfully meet the needs of our communities. A willingness for the board to embrace risk takes a lot of trust. You need to make sure that everyone is aligned and on board. Begin by taking an inventory of your board and organization's values and beliefs. Is risk embraced as a value? Is there an appetite for risk? Is there a commitment to investing time and building relationships with community partners? Use your shared values and beliefs to guide strategic conversations, assess the composition of the board, and perhaps recruit new board members. Consider and accept the possibility that you might need to part ways with board members who are not in alignment, and that's okay. We went through that process and emerged stronger. Having the right people on board enabled us to embrace a catalytic approach to our work.
The kind of housing we're funding requires new ideas and ways of thinking. What we learn from each project is critical to informing the field, including the kind of system change and cross-sector collaboration that brings new ideas to fruition. We place a high value on relationships and relationship building with the goal of supporting a strong constellation of partners who can inform our approach, learn from each other, strengthen their work, and advocate for system change. The capacity for risk and advancing new ideas goes hand in hand with relationships. You have to embrace both to be truly impactful. While our program-related investment in WeBuilt was a no-interest loan, supporting the proof of concept for a new affordable housing model was a tremendous return on that investment. As funders, our connections with such a wide range of organizations and projects provides a unique vantage point. It enables us to see the gaps and facilitate helpful connections or provide information that can move the work forward. It's been 1 year since we released the data study and launched our advocacy work, and the results exceeded our expectations. The data addressed a critical gap in information, yet it also expanded and diversified our relationships in a tremendous way, leading to increased learning, additional funding opportunities, greater collaboration, and stronger advocacy. Our partners used the study to educate policymakers, elected officials, and the affordable housing sector, building bridges with organizations in service to more housing for people with intellectual disabilities. Specifically, WeBuilt shared the data study with Clackamas County commissioners to raise awareness regarding the need for more funding in housing. The entire commission visited the WeBuilt community and subsequently approved the donation of land for another housing community. We also shared the data with division leads for the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Oregon. This has led to multiple meetings and conversations about a potential pilot project that could be shared at the federal level. We were invited to present the data study and recommendations at the statewide convening for the Housing Authorities of Oregon, which represent the largest affordable housing agencies in the state. We were invited to present the data and findings at the Regional Housing Oregon Conference in 2020, and then were invited back in 2021 to provide examples of solutions and ways sectors can collaborate. We presented the study and our recommendations to a Washington state congressman who is interested in advocating for this issue at a federal level. Staff continues to follow up and request additional information and resources. The coalition led by ARC of Washington, Disability Rights Washington, and Allies in Advocacy secured legislative wins that included $15 million in housing trust fund set-asides, $300,000 for the pre-design of community-based homes that provide nursing-level care, $100,000 to fund a deeper study of the community-based housing needs of adults with developmental disabilities and make recommendations on how to improve housing stability and capacity by December 2022. A 2% rate increase for supported living providers in 2022, and an additional 2% rate increase for 2023. $103 million to expand and strengthen home and community-based waiver services, which helps to improve access to affordable housing. The lack of housing and options for people with developmental disabilities is an under-resourced social justice issue that requires a multi-pronged approach. Advocacy is a critical tool in the pursuit of system change, while grants and mission investments lead to more housing and the advancement of new ideas. The impact that we're seeing in the first 18 months of this approach underscores for us the value and the need to adopt an integrated approach in service to this challenge. Thank you very much.